I'm Paul Bradbury. Um, I'm from Dorset, from Poole, where I grew up, and I'm an ordained pioneer minister in the Church of England. Um, and I also teach and train freelance, so at other pioneers through CMS and Cuddesdon, and also Sarum College. And I'm also about to submit a doctorate through the University of Roehampton. Yeah, I wrote this book, I think, because I recognise there are lots of books about church growth and lots of books that give this advice or that advice, and I've tried to write a book that is a bit more narrative and a bit more lyrical, and that tells a bit of a story, so that people can enter that story and reflect on it for themselves. A bit like, perhaps a bit like how Jesus told parables. It invites us into a metaphor, it invites us into a story, and helps us to make up our own mind rather than the author saying, "This is what you need to do." The commitment to place is really important to people, and so and that's something that I reflect on in the book. But also this sort of the kind of circling round in our tradition. So looking at places that have been places of prayer for a very long time, which may not be, quite the same in the way that they were. They're not monastic communities anymore, but that heritage that's dotted around our landscape is increasingly something that people are kind of circling back to and going, has this got something to offer? Both in terms of what we can learn from those stories and from those patterns of Christian expression, but also those places. A little chapel in the middle of a wood, in the middle of nowhere, you might say, in central Dorset, is being kind of revitalised as a place of prayer, and a place of kind of spiritual encounter for people. And I sense that's something that is enriching our church life at the moment, looking way back, if you like, in order to look forward. But I saw that in some of the conversations that I had with people. Yeah, in the fullness of time, I think time is important. It was a theme that kept coming. I mean, it's a theme that I've been thinking about for a while, and reading about for a while, but it's a theme that is picked up in lots of aspects of the book, although perhaps not. The book isn't directly about time, if you like, but there's a theme that is picked up in all sorts of ways. So one of those ways is the sort of long tradition of the church, and recognizing that we have this incredible story, salvation story, plus the tradition of the church, this sort of long timeline of the church that enables us to reach back and look for clues, look for inspiration, look for stories that will help us with the time that we're in. But I think the other thing is that the cultural shift that we're in, one of the ways I think of understanding that, or a perspective on that, that I have found particularly helpful, is thinking about it in terms of time. That actually one of the things about modernism is that it's accelerated life hugely. And I explore in the book particularly the writings of Andrew Root, who's connected with a German philosopher called Hartmut Rosa, who argues that it's the acceleration of our culture that sort of disconnected us, it's alienated us from ourselves, and from those around us. And Root would say it's alienated us from God, from that primary relationship with God, because we're so fixated on innovation and getting ourselves out of the predicament that we're in. So I think that that acceleration, our sense of time being a commodity that we use rather than a creature, that we live in God's time, it is a key way of understanding some of the issues that we're struggling with in the church. Yeah, I reflect on patience because, again, I think it tips into this whole question of time, and how we think about time. And I was really struck by the fact that the early bishops, as far as we know, didn't write a great deal about technique, about how to reach out to the communities, how to be a good evangelist, how to be a good missionary church, but it spent a lot of time talking about patience. So 3 significant letters to the church were about patience. And so again, it seemed to me that there's something there. I mean, I think the cultural context of the early church is perhaps is helpful for ourselves in understanding that they were a minority church working in a predominantly pagan context, and perhaps that's more like the context that we're in. And it seemed to me that those letters to the church were just exhorting the church to be patient, living witnesses to the gospel. Their priority wasn't to extend or reach in any kind of proactive, organized kind of way, but just through their living presence in communities. And so that seems to me uh, quite a challenge, perhaps quite a critique, but also quite an inspiration for us thinking about what does it mean for us to be communities of missionary disciples in every context. Is it about doing stuff? Is it about projects, or is it about you know prayerful, consistent, intentional communal presence? It's not about saying it's not saying let's ditch the doing, and it's not a binary thing. It's saying might we rebalance our thinking in terms of what does it mean to be a missional presence in every community, by thinking in terms of not just doing this or doing that, which I think is the knee-jerk reaction of the modern culture to say we need to do more, we need to organise ourselves more. Those early letters argue that there's also a hugely important dimension of what does it mean for us to be. How what's our posture, and part of that is that just patient, prayerful presence in a community. Yeah, I would love for the church to be less anxious about itself, less anxious about the institution and the organization, and more open to allowing people to explore in lots of different ways and imaginative ways what it means to be a community of witnessing disciples in a context, um, which means perhaps sort of being a little bit less rigid about the structures that might look like, or the forms that might take, and giving people a degree of freedom to explore that and experiment with that, and to experiment with that patiently and prayerfully, not in a hurry. So because I think the sort of challenge that we face is not one that's going to be worked out in the next 5 years or even 10 years, but it's going to take a long time. So yeah, a freedom to explore imaginatively what the church could be, and that will look, I think, very different. Even in local places, it could have a whole different set of different expressions. So I guess another thing I would wish for is the church to experiment again, prayerfully, patiently, how to be a mixed ecology, how to be a whole series of different expressions, and yet still be the church.